जयानिल प्रेम धन करुणा प्रचुर जयन जयानिल प्रेम धन करुणा प्रचुर जया ध्यान प्रभु कथा गला आचार्य ठाकुर ध्यान प्रभु कथा गला आचार्य ठाकुर कहाँ मोर स्वरूप रूप कहा सनातन कहा दशा रघुनाथ पति पावन कहा दशा रघुनाथ पतित पावन कहा मोर कहा कविराज कहा मोर भट्ट जोग एक काले कथा गला गौर नटरा एक काले कथा गला गौर नटरा पासने कोटिब माथा आनाले फसिब पासने कोटिब माथा आनाले फसिब गौरांगा गुनेरा निधि कथा गले पावा Gauranga Gunera Nidhi Kota Gale Pava Se Sava Sangira Sange Je Koila Vilaj Se Sava Sangira Sange Je Koila Vilaj Si Sangana Paya Kade Narotamoda Se Sangana Paya Kade Narotamoda Jayanila Premadana Karuna Prachur Jayanila Anna Prabhu Kota Gala Charjo Thakur Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur. He who brought the treasure of divine love and who was filled with compassion and mercy, where has such a personality as Srinivasacharya gone? Where are my Swarup Damodar and Rupa Goswami? Where is Sanatan? Where is Raghunath Das, the savior of the fallen? Where are my Raghunath Bhatta and Gopal Bhatta, and where is Krishnadas Kaviraj? Where did Lord Gauranga, the great dancer, suddenly go? I'll smash my head against a rock and enter into fire. Where will I find Lord Gauranga, the reservoir of all wonderful qualities? Being unable to obtain the association of Gauranga, accompanied by all these devotees in whose association he performed his pastime, Narottam Das simply weeps. Nanda Prabhu ki jai.
Krishna, Hari Hari Bol. So today we are celebrating the disappearance day of Jayananda Prabhu. And it's a very special day in that Srila Prabhupada, on the departure of Jayananda Prabhu in 1977, Srila Prabhupada said that we should celebrate his disappearance day the way we celebrate the disappearance days of all the great Vaishnav acharyas like that. So, and this is actually the first time that, from the time that Srila Prabhupada started the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is this is the first time that Srila Prabhupada actually said that, right? Only time, yeah. So we're very fortunate that in Srila Prabhupada's manifest presence here with us, that he was actually able to point out to us the qualities of this wonderful devotee, his wonderful disciple, Jayananda Prabhu. So I thought primarily we'll read from what Kalakanta Prabhu wrote, actually right after Jayananda disappeared. And although it's what we've been reading for many, many years, it's very well-rounded and very, has a lot of different features of Jayananda Prabhu's life and qualities. But before getting to that, and then also I'll stop around 8:30, and if anyone else wants to share their reflections about Jayananda Prabhu. And just for a second before going there, because disappearance day, we just had our dear Agnidev Prabhu just disappeared like yesterday or the night before. Yeah, and of course he's world famous for his kirtans, but he did such service in Laguna Beach right up the road. Like when we go to Laguna Beach and you go to that temple, thank you. So much of what we see there was because of Agnidev. There was a time in the 70s when somehow the devotees became tangled up in some illicit activities, and it was a huge scandal. I mean, it practically brought the whole temple down. I mean, federal agents raiding the Hare Krishna restaurant, big headlines. It was so dramatic. It was so bad that Srila Prabhupada actually said, these persons are a thorn in my side, right? That people who had connected with the devotees and who had, anyhow, so it was a big deal. And practically the temple was finished. I mean, and they sent Agnidev Prabhu down from LA, and then along with Bhattahari Prabhu. And, he spent the first couple years just reestablishing the validity of that as a temple of Krishna, like building bridges with the city and the neighbors and all the people that thought, that thought the worst of us, right? So Agnidev Prabhu and his family went down there and just reestablished, just brought it back to what it is and what it was supposed to be. So, I mean, so many other wonderful services he's done, but just right here in our own neighborhood, like when we go up there for those festivals, so much of that was because of his very sincere service there. And when we have these region-wide festivals, that because of he and Bhattahari Prabhu being so much into these sweet, sweet bhajans, it just became the go-to place for everybody in this geographic area, San Diego, LA. We'd all go there to do bhajans with them, and it just gradually became the go-to place for ecstatic festivals, And he had all those paintings in the temple done by Pandu Prabhu in Mayapur, and just created that whole mood of the Panchatattva, and so very, very wonderful service that he's rendered in so many ways. Anyway, just I know that's, and also just, it's probably already been done, but I don't see him here this second. But everybody, before he drives away, make sure you give Kaviraj Prabhu a big thank you. That house next door, like, it's been a school, it's been a Grihastha ashram, it's been a Brahmachari ashram, it's been a Brahmacharini ashram, it's been a Krishna lounge. And in all those years, I've never seen it looking this good. I mean, he saw something that needed to be done and took it on and did a fantastic job. So, just dove right in there, kind of in the mood of Jayananda Prabhu, I'd say, and really accomplished something wonderful. So anyway, we should all give him our heartfelt thanks, because it looks great. And not only looks great, but it'll probably be in great shape for years to come, all of that sanding and painting and preparing, and that's what keeps buildings alive. So, okay, now I can see. Also, just a couple little ones, just things I can remember before we start reading. I didn't have time to source exactly where, but I remember His Holiness Bhajanarayan Maharaj, a few things he mentioned about Jayananda Prabhu, some nice stories. One was that about his sincerity, that when Srila Prabhupada was giving him the Gayatri mantra, that he was having a little struggle with the Sanskrit, getting the pronunciation and the meter just right. And finally Srila Prabhupada said something to the extent of, "It's okay, you're so sincere, Krishna will appreciate your chanting," like that, So, and another one Bhajanarayan Maharaj used to tell, I heard him tell quite a few times, was that Jayananda was working very hard all the time, and Prabhupada came and he was giving his Bhagavatam classes, and because of how hard he was working and how little he was sleeping, Jayananda Prabhu was falling asleep in the class, and as is natural, devotees were giving him the elbow, Prabhu, and Prabhupada noticed it and said, "Leave him alone, he's working harder than all of you combined," something to that effect. So I've heard him tell that story a few times. So, it's Jayananda Prabhu, some of the things that we really reflect on was his service attitude, right? I mean, he's somebody who was very qualified materially, but he had lost his interest in material life. And then he came to the second temple in ISKCON in Haight-Ashbury, and he met the devotees, and he just immediately practically surrendered. But he had given up a career in engineering because he just didn't feel like he fit in with all that. And he was just driving a taxi, just doing something very simple. And very quickly he became temple president, and all the earnings from driving his taxi was probably how they supported the temple, Totally how they supported the temple. And along with that, he was also doing so much service. One year in the late 70s, I had the good fortune to be in LA for this day, and there were still a lot of devotees around there at that time, probably still are, but who were very close with Jayananda, so some of them were sharing memories. And one I remember was Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj said that at that time they had started the Radha Damodar traveling bus party, and at that time Jayananda Prabhu was, as he often was temple president in San Francisco. So the Radha Damodar bus was always on the move, and they came through San Francisco. When they came through San Francisco, Jayananda Prabhu very quickly found somebody that he deputized as temple president, because he just wanted to go on the bus and distribute books with men half his age by that time and be the mechanic to keep the big Greyhound bus running, So he just bailed on being the temple president and became the mechanic and the book distributor. And I also remember Bhajanarayan Maharaj saying that maybe it was when somewhere where he was, but he saw Jayananda out distributing books with young men, and when he saw that one of the young men was cold, he gave him his coat, So this is, he's one of those devotees that just sees, like we understand, what is that the third-class servant, you tell them what to do and they may or may not do it, and the second-class servant, you tell them what to do and they do it, and the first-class servant, they see what needs to be done and they do it, like that. So we see that so much with Jayananda Prabhu. He was just very, very eager to serve. That same festival, I remember Rameshwar Prabhu said that when he was a very young devotee, they were always putting on big festivals up there, and I don't think it was a Rath Yatra. I think he said it was a Lord Chaitanya festival, but they were throwing some big Gaur Purnims as well, and devotees went up from LA. And he said that many, many devotees were there, and the temple was pretty small, and devotees were sleeping everywhere, and he ended up sleeping in a closet. And Jayananda was his closet sleeping partner, apparently, because it was just so crowded. But what he noticed was that after the big festival, Jayananda Prabhu was in the kitchen washing all the pots and everything, and then he noticed that Jayananda Prabhu, after all that, everybody lights out, everybody going to sleep, and Jayananda Prabhu was chanting, and Rameshwar said, "Shouldn't you rest?" And he said, I have to finish my rounds. After like a 15, 16, 18-hour day of service, he finished his rounds, came in very late, took a little rest, and was up for Mangal Arti, So these are some of the things I heard that day that were very inspiring. And then we'll just start with reading a couple of the letters that Srila Prabhupada wrote to Jayananda Prabhu, because from those we can get some indication of how much he pleased Srila Prabhupada. And Doesn't get much better than that. And then we'll go to Kalakanta Prabhu's. So the first one is a letter that Srila Prabhupada wrote to Jayananda in February 1977. So this was a few months before Jayananda passed. But apparently Jayananda had just given Srila Prabhupada another large donation at that time. Srila Prabhupada wrote, "My dear Jayananda, please accept my blessings. I beg to acknowledge receipt of your letter dated February 21st, 1977. And I thank you for the check as well as the nice sentiments you have expressed. In the beginning, you also gave me 5,000, and now again you have sent." Yeah, in the very beginning, Jayananda Prabhu gave Prabhupada his life savings, which, you know, in the late 60s, $5,000. I mean, just a few years before that, my parents bought their house for $7,000. And about 5 years ago, my sister sold it for $875,000. So $5,000 back then was a life savings, literally. You know, so Srila Prabhupada said, "And now again you have sent. This body is today or tomorrow finished. We should not be very much bothered about the body. Trees also live for thousands of years, but that does not mean a successful life. A successful life is one of Krishna consciousness. By the grace of Krishna, from the very beginning, you are a devotee, and that is the real profit of your life. I thank you for your check, but I would prefer that you may require the money for your treatment." Because at that time he was dealing with very serious terminal cancer. "So if you like, I can return it. But I hear that you have some income. I pray to Krishna for your more advanced Krishna-conscious life." And then just after Jayananda Prabhu's disappearance, Srila Prabhupada wrote to him posthumously on the 5th of May, 1977. And Srila Prabhupada wrote, "My dear Jayananda, please accept my blessings. I am feeling very intensely your separation. In 1967, you joined me in San Francisco. You were driving my car and chanting Hare Krishna. You were the first man to give me some contribution, $5,000, for printing my Bhagavad Gita. After that, you have rendered very favorable service to Krishna in different ways. I so hope at the time of your death you were remembering Krishna, and as such you have been promoted to the eternal association of Krishna. If not, if you had any tinge of material desire, you have gone to the celestial kingdom to live with the demigods for many thousands of years and enjoy the most opulent life of material existence. From there you can promote yourself to the spiritual world. But even if one fails to promote himself to the spiritual world, at that time he comes down again on the surface of this globe and takes birth in a big family like a yogi's or a brahmana's or an aristocratic family, where there is again chance of reviving Krishna consciousness. But as you were hearing Krishna Kirtan, I am sure that you were directly promoted to Krishna Loka. Janma karma chame divyam evam yovedi tatvataha chaktvadeham punarjanma naiti mamati sorjuna. Krishna has done a great favor to you not to continue your diseased body and has given you a suitable place for your service. Thank you very much. Your ever well-wisher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. And lastly, on the letters, just at that time also, Srila Prabhupada wrote to Rameshwar, and he said, Jayananda's death is glorious. It is very good that he had stated, what is the use of such a useless body? Better to give it up. He has left his body very wonderfully, and he has been transferred to Vaikuntha. I have already sent a condolence letter for publication in Back to Godhead. Everyone should follow the example of Jayananda. I am very proud that I had such a nice disciple. If possible, Jayananda's picture should be hung in the Rath of Lord Jagannath, and in all of our temples a day may be set aside for holding a festival in his honor, just as we do on the disappearance day of the other great Vaishnavas. Letter by Srila Prabhupada on May 11th, 1977. Okay, so now we'll go to the nice life glorification Kalikanta Prabhu wrote. Okay. So Kalikanta begins this by saying, yesterday was the disappearance day of Jayananda Das Thakur. Jayananda was a very dear friend of mine and the closest thing I ever had to a brother in this life. He took me under his wing and nourished my Krishna consciousness. I am eternally indebted to him for instilling in me a service attitude and love for Srila Prabhupada. We honor the disappearance day of this extraordinary personality, Jayananda Das Thakur, with the following post. The Life of Jayananda Prabhu by Kalikanta Das. After the disappearance of Jayananda Das on May 1st, 1977, His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada instructed devotees all over the world to commemorate the event every year as they would any great Vaishnav's disappearance day. Therefore, we respectfully submit these pages to all devotees and friends of ISKCON as a means to remember and understand more about Jayananda's devotional service. Of course, we will see how he joined ISKCON and how he left this mortal world. More importantly, we shall see the astounding qualities possessed by a true devotee, a sincere disciple and genuine servant of Srila Prabhupada. Jayananda's beginnings in Krishna consciousness. Jayananda was the all-American boy, handsome, strong, intelligent, born in a more than middle-class family. Jayananda Jim Kaur took a degree in mechanical engineering from Ohio State University. With a background like that, it is surprising that Jayananda ended up as a cab driver in San Francisco. Kurandar once asked him why he didn't get a better paying job. Jayananda said, "I didn't fit in with the upper class crowd," he said. Jayananda introducing Srila Prabhupada at a public meeting. Always introspective in nature, Jayananda felt empty and unsatisfied within himself during his college years. He would often say that he was never happy before joining Krishna consciousness. His depression was almost suicidal when in 1967 he read a small article in a San Francisco paper about an Indian Swami who had come to the Bay Area to propagate the chanting of the names of God. Jayananda recalled feeling a ray of hope when he read that article. Thinking the Swami may have something to offer, Jayananda made up his mind to attend the Swami's lectures. Srila Prabhupada's early lectures in the Bay Area were mostly attended by hippies, and Jayananda was one of the only straight people there. Jayananda later recalled that I wasn't much of a religionist, but I was attracted to Srila Prabhupada. End quote. He was especially fond of attending the early morning lectures because at that hour, most of the hippies would be in bed. On some occasions, Jayananda would be the only guest listening to Srila Prabhupada speak from the Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada was always fond of Jayananda, and sometimes he would invite his budding disciple to take prasad with him in his room. This is Jayananda again. Srila Prabhupada would cook prasad and serve me, Jayananda recalled. He didn't say anything, he just kept feeding me, and I kept eating. End quote. Jayananda soon donated his life savings of $5,000 to Srila Prabhupada to help His Divine Grace print the Bhagavad Gita as it is. As more and more devotees joined ISKCON in the Bay Area, Jayananda continued to work as a cab driver and supported the temple by contributing all of his earnings. Jayananda's attraction for the process of Krishna consciousness. Chandanacharya remembers this special feature about Jayananda. He was completely enamored by Krishna consciousness. Even when he'd go out on incense runs all by himself, he would rise every morning before 4, have a little Mangalarti, chant all his rounds, read and cook prasad. He never deviated. He loved it. He was completely happy as long as he was practicing Krishna consciousness. One of the first businesses to support ISKCON was the Spiritual Sky incense business. It's a very big business, actually, and Jayananda Prabhu would go on runs and get stores to buy the incense wholesale, and they would keep buying it like that. Take prasadam. For example, Jayananda worshipped prasadam. When a little prasad spilled on the floor, he would always bend down on all fours and lick it up. He loved to cook, offer, distribute and eat prasad in a big way. He would always take prasad with him and distribute it, whether he was making a boga run or taking a chanting party downtown. He would even say prasadam in a special way that made you immediately want to take some. Jayananda knew how to attract people to Krishna consciousness with the prasadam weapon. When a new devotee came, for example, Jayananda would see to it that he was sumptuously fed with prasadam. When Jambavan Das was just becoming a devotee, Jayananda would bring him a plate of prasadam so big that he thought he could never eat it all. When he finally did finish the plate, Jayananda immediately put an identical plate down before him. "I can't eat that," said Jambavan. "Srila Prabhupada said that we should eat till we waddle like a duck," said Jayananda. Jambavan would finish the second plate. Of course, Jayananda himself could be found honoring large quantities of prasad anytime, day or night. He was the kind of devotee who would come up to you at 10 o'clock with some peanut butter halva and say, "Hey Prabhu, come here, check this out." Another example of his attachment to Krishna consciousness is Jayananda's love for kirtan. Excuse me, one sec. Jayananda's love for kirtan. Jayananda was always eager to take the whole temple out on Harinam chanting parties. He had a special attraction for chanting in the streets. Whether kirtan was held in the temple or in the street, Jayananda could always be seen dancing and chanting enthusiastically. When he was making Maharaj Das into a devotee, Maharaj Das lived here for some years, Jayananda would visit his house and have big kirtans. Even if there were only two of them, they would jump and chant, "Nitai Gaur, Haribol!" Also, Karandar recalls how one day, after working very hard for 10 hours straight, Jayananda suddenly announced, "Hey, it's 10 to 7, let's go to Artik." Everyone else was so tired that Artik was the last thing on their minds. But Jayananda quickly jumped into the shower and then bounced down to the temple room for Artik. Of all the processes of Krishna consciousness, Jayananda was most attached to preaching, whether it was during the Sunday feast, while making incense runs, or while building Ratha Yatra carts. Jayananda was always trying to find some person with whom he could share his ecstasy in Krishna consciousness. His preaching was very simple and easy to listen to. Quote, "We just have to keep chanting and have faith in the name." End quote. "We just have to chant and take prasadam. Srila Prabhupada is so kind to give us such a simple process." End quote. Karandar remembers how Jayananda preached to him on his first day in the temple. Karandar was for many years the GBC for LA and for this zone and leader of the Los Angeles temple. As they worked together preparing a little garden for Srila Prabhupada at the old Los Angeles temple, Jayananda said, "You know, things don't always go just right in Krishna consciousness. You have to keep chanting." At the time, Karandar couldn't imagine how anything could go wrong in Krishna service. Years later, however, as he found himself still remembering those words, Karandar could appreciate the real potency of what Jayananda had said. Quote, "So many things may come and go, just have faith in the name." End quote. Jayananda's preaching was very attractive for the non-devotees. Chandanacharya recalls seeing Jayananda engaged in preaching late one night. It was 11:30 p.m. and Jayananda was fixing up a broken down Sankirtan van. As he lay on his back working under the van, he preached to two hippies who were standing nearby. All they could see of him was a pair of legs, but they stood by listening, completely absorbed as Jayananda worked and preached away. As soon as he felt a person was at all ready, Jayananda would preach to him about chanting and about Srila Prabhupada. There was no protocol or strict etiquette, just sincere and confidential glorification of Krishna. True to his character, Jayananda was often seen preaching to guests from his wheelchair, even during his last days in this world. Devotees who knew him could tell from a distance exactly what he was saying. You just have to have faith in the name. Actually, this is the end of that preaching section. 1979, there was a temple in Salt Lake. It was before Chirupru and Vaibhavi went up there, but there was a temple that had been started by Jayananda Prabhu, actually, in Salt Lake City, right by Liberty Park. And at that time, it was kind of a seasonal temple. And San Diego, LA, and Laguna Beach would take turns running it. So it was San Diego's turn. So Mahatma Prabhu, myself, and about 4 or 5 book distributors went up there for the summer. And we had a Sunday feast, and we distributed books. Mostly it was for book distribution, but we had a Sunday feast, and we had programs every day. And I remember at the Sunday feast, one family was coming regularly, and a young man, probably 16, 17 maybe at that time, he told me that when he was a little boy, his family would bring him there, and Jayananda would take the time and read Krishna book to him, and just age appropriately was sharing Krishna consciousness with him. And they were very, very devoted people, actually. It was nice to meet them. Jayananda's humility. Humility was certainly Jayananda's most prominent quality. He treated everyone as his superior, even new devotees. Maharaj Das remembers that Jayananda was always asking his advice. Hey, Bhakti Mike, what do you think of this? Although his service was glorious, he never wanted any glory. He avoided praise like the plague. Sounds like Bhajan Narayan Maharaj, right? Devotees got to know that if they wanted to be around him, they'd better not praise Jayananda. Otherwise, he would simply leave. Once when he was with Danavir, someone came to Jayananda and began praising him. Jayananda just ignored it. Later he turned to Danavir and said, if you've been around this movement a few years, people naturally offer you some respect, end quote. Not that his service or qualities were so great, but just he was around for a few years, was his humble thinking. If he ever spoke about himself at all, Jayananda would speak so humbly that Lochan Das recalls, Lochan Prabhu made this wonderful murti of Srila Prabhupada on our Vyasasan. Lochan Das recalls, it was difficult not to think of yourself as being better than him. If you had any reason to be puffed up, Jayananda would bring it out in you, end quote. Feeling himself unworthy, he would step aside so that others could lead kirtan, give classes, or do arti. Instead, he could be found fixing cars, unplugging toilets, washing dishes, or taking out trash. Once a new boy came to visit the San Francisco temple. He wanted to help, so Keshava Das sent him to the trash area where Jayananda was preparing the weekly trash run. Jayananda told the boy, quote, I'm the garbage man around here. For years I've been watching garbage men carry out trash, and now Krishna is giving me a chance to do this for him, end quote. The boy not only helped load the trash, but accompanied Jayananda to the garbage dump. Later, that boy became a devotee, and he recalled thinking, quote, if the garbage men at this temple can be so blissful, just imagine what the rest of the devotees are like, end quote. Karandar recalls another incident of Jayananda's humility. One day, before Ratha Yatra, I spent the whole day running around with Jayananda. By the time we got back to the temple, it was midnight. The whole building was so crowded that we couldn't find any space to lie down. Finally, we found room in one little storage closet. I was so tired that all I could do was throw my sleeping bag on the floor and lie down. Then I saw Jayananda walking out of the room. I asked him, where are you going? He said he'd be right back. But I kept pressing him, and finally he explained that he had some rounds of japa chanting to finish up. He didn't want to keep me awake by chanting in our room, nor did he want me to feel bad because he was going out to do something else. He just wanted to slip away to some corner and fulfill his vow. I remember saying, sometimes it's not possible to finish all one's rounds because there's too much work to do. That's okay, I'm not too tired, Jayananda replied. I was amazed not only by his consideration for me, but by his full submission to Srila Prabhupada. Although perfectly qualified, Jayananda was reluctant to take a post as temple president or sannyasi. It was not that he wouldn't or couldn't do it. He would do whatever was asked of him. He was happiest just to be working under someone. In this way, he was the backbone of the Bay Area's ISKCON temple for years. Through frequently changing administrations, he would always faithfully serve the acting temple president. He was very special, yet no one paid any special attention to him. That was just the way he liked things. Next section is Jayananda's service attitude. Jayananda was always ready to do whatever was necessary to push on Krishna consciousness. He was expert at everything: cooking, preaching, deity worship, public relations, sankirtan, selling incense, construction, and everything else it takes to run a temple. He was a tireless worker. He would be the first one up in the morning and the last one to sleep at night. It was Jayananda who was always running out to get the flowers, Jayananda who was washing dishes and making sure the kitchen was clean, Jayananda who was often missing class while he was out doing some service, and Jayananda who was always encouraging others to go out and preach and setting the example himself. Whatever assignment he was given, he would always get done, even if he had to suffer personally for it. No matter how hard he was working, he would never stop for a nap during the day. He seemed to be inexhaustible. Jambavan Prabhu remembers that many times the San Francisco devotees would go out to Berkeley to distribute the leftover prasad after a Sunday feast. Quote, first Jayananda would be in the kitchen cleaning, then someone would say, hey, how about this leftover prasadam? Jayananda would say, okay, first let's get this kitchen clean. He would organize the cleanup crew and then work twice as hard as anybody. Then he would transfer the prasad, load it and the devotees into the van, drive the van to Berkeley, organize the distribution of prasad, and lead the kirtan while we distributed. In later years, when he was with the Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan party, Jayananda would help manage and sustain the traveling bus program and simultaneously do all-day Sankirtan day in and day out, side by side with brahmacharis scarcely half his age. In spite of his advanced position and seniority, he never asked for any special treatment. Leading devotees would often describe him as, quote, the most advanced devotee in the movement, end quote. The next section is, so it's 8:30. Should I keep going or? Okay. Jayananda's freedom from fault-finding. Those who knew Jayananda always noticed one remarkable quality about him. He could not criticize others. It was against his nature. Even if a devotee did something which warranted criticism, Jayananda would usually say nothing, or else something that made the mistake appear to be perfectly understandable. No matter who was giving class or leading kirtan, he would always appreciate it. He never spoke harsh words or chastised anybody. If one devotee was criticizing another within earshot of Jayananda, Jayananda would simply leave. Is it Raghunath Bhatta Goswami? One of the 6 Goswamis is known for that same characteristic, that if he was within earshot of criticism, gone. Rather than criticize others, Jayananda would contribute nothing less than positive Krishna-conscious energy to any situation. Sometimes devotees would bring up their expansive aspirations for spreading Krishna consciousness. Jayananda would always encourage their ideas, however extraordinary. At the same time, he was not a fool. He could always pick the right man to do a particular duty. Because he knew how to encourage people, the temple leaders would always assign new men to work with Jayananda. He saw no distinction between new devotee and old devotee. Both were his superiors. He could quickly give a new man a sense of identity and a feeling that he belonged in Krishna consciousness. A true Vaishnava, he was expert at fanning any little spark of Krishna consciousness into a big fire. Few will dispute the claim that Jayananda made more devotees and helped more pull through than anyone else in the movement. I mean, you even hear stories like some guy came to throw rocks at the devotees, right? Building the cart on some site, and Jayananda somehow called him over and gave him some prasad and started engaging him in service. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the conclusion of that story is that he went on to become a devotee and even a sannyasi. Dear to everyone. Like the 6 Goswamis, Jayananda was, quote, dear both to the gentle and the ruffians, end quote. He was as much at home with the Italians at the produce market as with the brahmacharis in the temple. He would make friends on street Sankirtan, and they would often come up to him and say, hey, where have you been? Once a devotee was approached by a staggering drunk in San Francisco. The drunk looked at his robes and asked the devotee, hey, where's my old friend Jayananda? Many devotees, including Danavir and Chandanacharya, had the experience of taking over Jayananda's old territory on incense selling runs or boga runs. They would meet people who said such things as, where is Johnny Ananda? Or, that man, he's the nicest and most pure man I've ever met, End quote. One man told Chandanacharya, "Well, I don't know much about your philosophy, but if that Jayananda is into it, it must be all right." End quote. Once, near the Ratha Yatra cart worksite, Jayananda invited Keshava to step inside a bar and meet some friends of his. They walked inside, and immediately some 25 faces looked up and smiled brightly. Someone said, "Oh, this must be your friend you were telling us about, the temple president." End quote. They presented the two devotees with a sack full of vegetarian groceries, which they had chipped in together to buy. Among the devotees, Jayananda was like a big brother, always compassionate and willing to listen to them. But devotees rarely burdened him with their problems. When you were around Jayananda, said Karandar, you had no problems. The devotees loved Jayananda and talked about him during long drives on traveling Sankirtan. He was dear to them because he had a sense of humor too. Jambavan recalls being awakened one night at midnight by Jayananda. "Wake up," said Jayananda. "I've got a benediction for you." He then pushed a big samosa into the sleepy Jambavan's mouth. Like Maharaj Yudhisthira, Jayananda's enemy was never born. The next section is called Expert at Engaging Everyone. Jayananda was very eager to see everyone engaged in Krishna's service. He once wrote, "When I reflect on my consciousness, had I not had association with devotees and Srila Prabhupada, I shudder to imagine the nightmare I would be in. If we could become a little dedicated to distributing the mercy, so many could be saved, so much suffering." End quote. Because of his genuine compassion, Krishna gave Jayananda the unique ability to make people want to serve Krishna directly or indirectly. Whenever a new bhakta would come, Jayananda made him feel that he was engaged in important work. He was older, bigger, and stronger than just about anyone in the temple, and everyone was glad to be working under him. He was willing to let people do things their own way without getting finicky about details, unless somebody's creativity interfered with practical necessity. New bhakta or old, everyone felt satisfied after a day's work with Jayananda. This was especially evident during Ratha Yatra time. Jayananda would organize a crew of cynics, bloopers, uncooperative personalities, and non-devotees off the street to build the Ratha Yatra carts. Although many of his men sat down for a smoke during breaks, he would get them to work 10, 12, or 14 hours a day. He was always glorifying others and working hard himself. In fact, he worked harder than anybody else. All those qualities made him very inspiring to work with. Moreover, there was something very personal about Jayananda that made everyone want to help him. Once, he and Maharaj Das were struggling to load a heavy refrigerator on a truck. Two drunks were walking up the alley, and Jayananda said, quote, "I'm going to give them a chance to do some devotional service," end quote. His enthusiasm for devotional service was usually contagious, and this was no exception. Those drunks were right in there helping, and the job was done in no time. Afterwards, as usual, Jayananda said to the drunks, "Now say Hare, now say Krishna, now say Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Jai, Hari Bol." Thank you, fellas. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Jayananda's frugality. Jayananda was well known as a transcendental miser. He hated to spend any of Srila Prabhupada's money. Personally, he had almost no possessions, even during his years as a householder. When he was on the road selling incense, he would sleep in the car or on a bench, or sometimes with friends he'd make in various cities. Many of these friends, such as Maharaj Das and Jiva Das, later became devotees as a result of Jayananda's preaching. Jayananda would use his personal charm with people to get them to give everything free or at a discount for Krishna. Without spending huge sums of money, he would personally collect nearly all the boga, flowers, lumber, paint, and everything else needed to put on Ratha Yatra each year. One year there were hundreds of devotees at the temple to feed just before the festival. Jayananda went to see one of his famous friends at the produce market, Banana King Louis. He came back with 4 free truckloads of bananas and first-class pineapples. Coupled with some donated milk products, the devotees ate bananas, pineapples, and cream, as much as anyone could eat, all for free. Jayananda would get almost anything done for free, such as printing, advertising, and mimeographing for Rath Yatra publicity. What he couldn't get for free, he'd get at a discount. And when he paid, he'd get his money's worth. For example, after the festival would end, he'd rent a big truck with which to haul all the equipment back to the temple. Although the devotees would be exhausted after weeks of hard work, he'd insist that everyone come out and help pack things away, lest he have to keep the truck another day and pay another $50 rent. Although he was a senior devotee and could have had anything he wanted, he always dressed in old dhotis and work clothes, which he'd buy for $1 per set at the Salvation Army thrift store. The next section is Jayananda, King of Rath Yatra. Jayananda was the backbone of the Bay Area Rath Yatra for years, which is the first Rath Yatra in ISKCON. And his experiences at each one are summarized in the 1977 Rath Yatra edition of Back to Godhead magazine. Behind the scenes, Jayananda was doing everything in preparation for each festival. He would beg food, flowers, and funds, buy materials and build the carts, advertise, arrange for permits, and organize the cooking and serving of prasad. Although things always went right down to the wire, he would consistently succeed in fulfilling all his plans every year. After the festival, Jayananda personally brought a prasadam cake or pie to each and every person who had helped in some way or another. Because of his efforts, the devotees in the Bay Area enjoy, to this day, an amazingly harmonious relationship with the city officials. During the weeks before the festival, Jayananda would sleep at the site where the Rath carts were under construction. He would rise every day at 4 a.m. without fail, even if that meant he was only getting 3 hours sleep or less. To keep his crew enlivened, he would cook fantastic prasadam on a tiny gas stove at the site. The preparations were always carefully offered, and each was filled with so much bhakti that the temple devotees would sometimes sneak down to the cart site just to get some. Jayananda regarded his final Rath Yatra, the 1976 festival in New York, to be his quote-unquote most successful. Here is how he described the event in a letter to Keshava Das. Quote, "Somehow I got the good fortune to work on the New York Rath Yatra. It was such an auspicious opportunity. Prabhupada was coming. There was finally a first-class center in Manhattan, and somehow Toshan got an okay to use Fifth Avenue for the parade route. Jambavan was here, and we had a couple of other boys who worked very hard. I was praying that somehow we could just get the carts finished. Somehow, by Krishna's grace, it worked out. You wouldn't have believed some of the events. The night before the festival, Saturday, at about 5 or 6 p.m., we were raising Balaram's dome, and it was at the top when a huge gust of wind caught it and blew the whole thing over. The framework was all busted, the tubing twisted, etc. I didn't see how we could rectify the situation, as there was so much to do on the other two carts. But two devotees who are expert builders vowed they'd somehow get it back together. I had some extra pipes, etc., and they worked all night. And by Krishna's grace, all three chariots were at 5th Avenue and 59th Street by 6:30 a.m. Sunday morning. There's no place like New York for Rath Yatra. The parade was tremendous, as was the scene in the park. Even when we pulled the carts back to the construction site, people would come out of their apartments and bars and chant, Hare Krishna. I guess that occasion was the perfection of my career in Krishna consciousness, end quote. And although that was the last Rath Yatra he, put on and was present for, he also put on the first, he was the inspiration and driving force of the first Los Angeles Rath Yatra the next year in 1977. And I think he disappeared before the parade, but you hear a lot of stories. I remember Mukunda Maharaj speaking extensively. Dravida Prabhu was also there. And, like from a wheelchair, he was directing the whole thing, the construction of the carts, the devotees that were getting the permits, like everything. It's very amazing. And he was in the very last months of his life, but he was giving everything he could to put on the first LA Rath Yatra. Jayananda's relationship with Srila Prabhupada. Jayananda said of Srila Prabhupada, quote, I knew he didn't want to cheat me, so I wanted to work for him, end quote. In his dealings with Srila Prabhupada, Jayananda kept his usual low profile. He was generally off working on some project when Prabhupada came to San Francisco. Their relationship was, therefore, as Karandar describes it, quote, one of old friends, or very economical. That is to say, Jayananda did not want to go in for long meetings with Srila Prabhupada, even when all the other temple leaders were doing so. By way of reciprocation, Srila Prabhupada would invariably call for Jayananda when he arrived in the temple. Sometimes he would have to make repeated requests, and when Jayananda was finally located, he would resist, saying, no, I can't go see him, I'm too dirty, I'm too fallen. He'd work after festivals and let others see Srila Prabhupada. Thus, Jayananda's relationship with Prabhupada was always one of service. Service to Prabhupada was the core of Jayananda's life. Once Danavir asked him, how does one make spiritual advancement in Krishna consciousness? Jayananda answered, I don't know, I'm too busy working to think about it, end quote. Srila Prabhupada always appreciated Jayananda's sincere service. He wrote to Jayananda in December 1975, I was very happy to get your recent letter. I am always thinking of you and praying to Krishna for your advancement in Krishna consciousness. Yes, I remember the old days in San Francisco. Krishna has been so kind upon me to have sent so many sincere disciples to help me push on this movement on behalf of my Guru Maharaj. You continue with your program there in San Francisco, always strictly keeping our principles, and Krishna will bless you with greater and greater realization of the importance of this movement. I am dependent upon you, my older disciples, to carry it on. I hope this meets you well. Jayananda's final meeting with Srila Prabhupada took place in New York City at the 1976 Rath Yatra. When Prabhupada arrived at the temple, Jayananda drove the car to pick him up. Prabhupada was sitting in the back seat and he asked, who is driving? The devotee said, this is Jayananda. Prabhupada said, oh, I know Jayananda. He gave me 5,000 to print my Bhagavad Gita, end quote. There's that, I think Srila Prabhupada would often quote it, maybe from Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, but he said, don't try to see Krishna. Act in such a way that Krishna is interested to see you, right? So we see that in Jayananda, like he's so surrendered to Srila Prabhupada and to Krishna. And Jayananda's fearlessness. Let's see how much we have left. Is it okay to keep going? We just have, let's see, I think we just have like 2 pages, maximum 3 left. Okay. Jayananda's fearlessness. Jayananda was not only big and powerful in body, he was strong with faith in Krishna. Therefore, nothing could frighten him. Once, on San Francisco's Market Street, Jayananda was playing mridanga and leading a kirtan party when down the street, an enormous man appeared. He was at least 7 feet tall and weighed perhaps 300 pounds. His unkempt beard and drunken appearance indicated that he was an old veteran living in the bars off his pension. As he approached the kirtan party, the temple's reserve Kshatriyas, Keshavadas and Guru Kripadas, readied themselves for a fight. Sure enough, the monster marched up to Jayananda, turned, and began to shout, "Stop that chanting!" Jayananda looked him straight in the eye and said firmly, "Just chant Hare Krishna! Just chant Hare Krishna!" To everyone's amazement, the drunk simply turned and walked away without a scrap. The ultimate expression of Jayananda's fearlessness came at the end of his life, when he was diagnosed with leukemia and cancer of the lymph glands. He wrote from the hospital, quote, "I was out of the hospital for a month going to the clinic, and now I am back for a couple of weeks of intensive treatment. Actually, the whole thing was a real blessing, as it made me realize that death is right at hand. Somehow I need these potent reminders to help me advance in Krishna consciousness. For the time I was in the temple, I was appreciating Krishna consciousness so much more than ever before, so it's been a real blessing." I remember Gunagraj Maharaj mentioning that at one point he did some treatments down in Tijuana, and he would come through the San Diego temple and spend some days. And I remember Gunagraj Maharaj saying, just like we read here, that when people would express their sorrow at his condition, he would say things like, "It's Krishna's mercy, he's giving me these potent reminders, it's just what I need." So it's amazing fearlessness. Even in his last few months in LA Temple, Jayananda never succumbed to fear or self-pity. When his old friends would come to his room and see his withered form and ghostly appearance, they would find it hard to talk their way around his condition. When Jayananda communicated, on the other hand, what Jayananda communicated, on the other hand, was complete disinterest in the whole subject of his health. Instead, he was scheming how to put on Rath Yatra in Los Angeles. Sitting on the lawn in his wheelchair, looking like death personified, Jayananda could not stop thinking and talking about Rath Yatra. Kurandar remembers looking at him from his desk. Jayananda was there, the epitome of Krishna consciousness and fearlessness of death. Kurandar thought it odd that he didn't feel any great pity or remorse for Jayananda. Then he could understand that if Jayananda was so Krishna conscious, how could anyone look at him and not also be Krishna conscious? Jayananda pushed on the Los Angeles Rath Yatra until he was so weak that he could no longer pick up the phone and call old friends to ask for donations. Factually, he collected a large amount of Lakshmi and devised the various means by which the festival could take place. The festival managers will readily admit that without Jayananda's presence, the first LA Rath Yatra festival in LA would not have taken place in 1977. Thus he proved that by engaging in devotional service, one transcends even the fear of death. Conclusion. That Jayananda passed away while Srila Prabhupada was still on the planet is not insignificant. In this way, Srila Prabhupada was able to confirm to all of us that, quote, everyone should follow the example of Jayananda, end quote, from Prabhupada's letter. Certainly those who knew Jayananda should take it upon themselves to preach about his qualities of humility, eagerness to serve, equanimity, and devotion to Krishna and Prabhupada. We offer our humble obeisances to all such devotees who understand these qualities and try to share them. We offer our humble obeisances unto His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, and to Sri Srimad Jayananda Prabhu, the exemplary teacher of Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. His Grace Jayananda Prabhu ki jai. Oh.
One thing,
please.
It'll just take a minute and a half. I was in LA when he disappeared, but I wasn't at the side of his desk. I just remember him coming up there, and everyone was conscious of him, and they would go see him. But I remember years later, you may know about this. He was there in Tijuana at first, and he was trying to get the treatment you can get in LA or get in the United States. There was Laetrile, whatever it was. So anyway. So my understanding, I think it was Gunagari Maharaj who would go out and down and see him periodically, and he found that there was other patients there, and he set up a program where he could read Bhagavad Gita in class and everything like that, which was enlivening to him, and the others. And then one day he went down there, and Jayananda was saying he had packed all his stuff and he was ready to leave, because they stopped allowing him to give class, and so that's when he came up to. I don't know how he stayed here. He came up to L.A., and the understanding was he was going to depart there, and he was camped there, but otherwise he might have stayed down there for the treatment and everything like that. Now it may have been after that he gave the 5,000 to Prabhupada that he had saved for getting that treatment, so that final 5,000 was also very significant. And unfortunately, I never really had any, much association with him. I just saw the whole thing developing in LA. I was there at the time for the first Rath Yatra, and I later heard, that Rameswar was reluctant to do it, but Jayananda was arranging for it even without Rameswar's understanding what would happen. So it was kind of a fait accompli, by the time that, hey, the wood has already been ordered, and we've spent this money, and so-and-so is coming, and so-and-so is coming. So Rama said, all right, And I remember all of us pitched in because we had to make the signs, those signs. They didn't have the what is it, the Festival of India guys to bring out all the signs and everything, you know. So we were over at the BBT warehouse, a lot of us, and working on those signs. You know, here's the prasadam, and here's, you know, all this stuff. And I swear to God, they had elephants. There were at least 2 elephants that were I don't know where they, you know, and they rented them. Yeah, there's many places in LA where you can rent elephants. Yeah, right. I mean, exactly. They were locally, and 1 or 2 birdies was riding on the back, you know, and Alice Coltrane came. She was an enthusiast by that time, and it was interesting because the record that he made, you know, her famous husband. I was a big jazz follower, and I made his last track. It was called "A Love Supreme," you know, and I heard it, and he was playing his saxophone or something for a while, and then he was just, "A love supreme, a love supreme," you know, because I was a complete atheist, and if my jazz idol was into it, God, you know, maybe I should start investigating, you know. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but that's the scene, and so many people came to see him, you know, in LA at the end there, because he was well known by so many others, you know, and appreciated.
I just want to add something to the story. You told that devotee Adharana Damodar who was in the parking lot with Jayananda, who Jayananda gave the jacket to, was Prahlad Priya. And he held on to that jacket for many, many, many years. And then when they have that, I don't know if it's a Pushpa Samadhi, but at the Jagannath temple there in Mayapur, he donated the jacket. So you'll see that jacket inside the Jayananda's Samadhi kind of thing. That Prahlad Priya was the one who received that jacket to keep him warm.
Prahlad Priya is, what's his name? Madhur Puri's father. Yeah, just so there's some context. Some devotees don't know Prahlad.
To know Prahlad Priya is to love Prahlad Priya. Hare Krishna.
He's living in Mayapur, right?
Yeah, he and his wife, they've retired there in Mayapur. Okay, time for prasadam in the mood of Jayananda. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Jayananda Prabhu ki jai.